what we thought we would do is get a variety group of panelists that have managed sales operations or sales teams for a large part of their career, and ask them, what career pathing advice would they have to all of you, and maybe there's some key takeaways you have as you think about your job and what you do and the skills that you have. It's going to be impossible for me to, it's a disservice for me to kind of go around and say how amazing the group of panelists are, but I'll try my best to describe the backgrounds. On the left with me, I have Sudheesh, is the president of Nutanix, where he runs basically all of go-to-market operations from sales to services to channel and much more than that. Nutanix, for those that don't know, had one of the most successful IPOs last year, so congratulations to you. Prior to Nutanix, he ran different types of sales leadership roles, both technical and non-technical, at IBM and DDN and OnStore and other roles. We also we're very lucky and fortunate to have Carl again from last year. Carl is currently a partner at Sequoia Capital, which is one of the most respectable venture firms out there. But prior to Sequoia, Carl took VMware from about 200 people to 20,000 employees. So if anybody's trying to think about scale and seen it, it's definitely Carl, from 30 million to about 7 billion in revenue. But prior to that, ran sales at Inktomi and other companies that you're all probably familiar with. We also have David Obrand. He's the COO of Radius. Prior to being the COO of Radius, he was the chief customer officer at Yammer. For those that are familiar with Yammer, Yammer was acquired by Microsoft for $1.2 billion. He took the sales and go-to-market organization from 3 to 60 people. Prior to that, he has ran different types of sales organizations at Salesforce.com. And then we're lucky to have Jim Wilson here, who's an operating partner at Costanoa Ventures. But prior to Costanoa Ventures, spent a vast majority of his career at early-stage sales organizations, running sales teams from PTC to Groove Networks, which got acquired by Microsoft, as well as other successful companies that you're all probably very familiar with. So before we get started, just a round of applause for the panelists here. So it's honored to have you.
So we had the luxury of looking at some of the things that good companies, best companies in the world have done, and then sort of reimagine what this function and the kinds of people that will be leading that function should be doing. And that's a good thing because early 1990s or early 2000s when companies started, technologies didn't exist. The kind of technology that we have access to, big data, analytics, computing, pattern matching, all those kind of things, right? I think what I found is this is one of those professions where you can do as little or as much as you want. So, some people just want to do a 9-to-5 job and then go home and do other things. There are a few things that you can do. But what's happening more and more in this function, in my view, is that I can't even imagine this as an operations back office function in my mind. This is the front end. Anything that can be automated will get automated, and this is a function that figures out how to automate. This is a function that is spearheading strategic investment that this company needs to make. This is a function that figures out the use cases that plays well, the spiff that pans out well, the geos that actually makes a needle move, the individual seller who's creative enough, doing something that is good that we can replicate across the board. All of those things are coming together in this function. So what I found is that extremely smart people who are not constrained by their own insecurities and egos. And that's important because this is a function that you get to see who makes how much, for example, who gets rewarded for just riding a coattail on a large ELA, for example, as opposed to really making it happen, how much money he or she made because of that. All of those small things can hamper the performance of a new age sales operations person. So to me, this function, this profession is for those people who have that good IQ and really good EQ, who want to figure out and move the needle for the business. And there is plenty of opportunities to keep charting new courses and then going places that business wants to go by spearheading.
What do you think makes a great sales ops leader versus a good one? What is that delineation that you guys see? I mean, David, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so it's a little about what Carl talked about in terms of being forward-thinking. And it really is a cross-functional role. I mean, I'm going to have to convince any of you, you're all in the role. We'll probably learn more from you than you from us on this one. But it truly is cross-functional. So, what I see in terms of great operations leaders, and in my last operating leader at Yammer ended up going and moving out and became a VP of sales in his next role. And a lot of what he demonstrated to the org and allowed us to scale as fast as we did is he was in front with product, understanding what we were building, how it would translate into the market. He was with the marketing organization, understanding the messaging. He was then bringing all of that back to the sales organization, driving sales enablement up front through his team, as well as driving the career trajectory of all of the individual sellers in the organization, really driving a learning and development mindset. He was working very closely with the finance organization to make sure that we were managing burn and growth in the appropriate way, so we weren't hiring too fast and setting our reps up for failure, or hiring too slow and actually losing market opportunity. But having that cross-functional mindset every day, and not thinking about how do I report on what we did or didn't do well last quarter, but how do I change the trajectory from last quarter to this quarter and next quarter, and how do I think about next fiscal year and what we really need to be doing today, even though we're only a week into Q2, to make sure that we are lining up for a great Q1 next year, whether that's hiring or messaging or competitive intelligence, whatever it is.
What advice do you have for people that to make them successful if they had a sales background in a sales operations role? I mean, is it different depending on the skills that they came from? Jim, I don't know if you have a thought.
You've got a sales leader, and a good sales leader needs a consigliere. You should be that person. Okay, so that's your sales role. What they talked about earlier about finance, you need to understand finance, but beyond that, you need to know all the different functions that can go into this role. And it's moved beyond. To me, what's amazing is, 5 years ago, this was just thought of as, hey, someone that was managing Salesforce. Well, now if you look at all the instrumentation that's happened, Clari is a great example, but there's so many other great tools that are out there that'll help you. You need to understand the tools and the functions that go with it. Deal desk, market segmentation. I think in a lot of companies, they struggle with, as they grow, how to segment the market. These are all opportunities for a sales ops person to assume more of a leadership position in the company. And that's really what I would suggest they do, is understand all the functions that can fall under this operational role.
For the folks that don't have a sales background, is it a different feedback, that you would have for them? Because you guys all have sales backgrounds, right?
Yeah, I want to connect this and the last question you had about good to great leaders. I want to highlight how this function has evolved to one where the most important thing that you have to have a sales ops leader is any other leader, which is be really good at managing and leading and inspiring people. Because this function now more than ever needs the best and smartest brains and minds working for them. Those smart creatives that we talk about, they don't get inspired and stick around and do what they do because of money. They work because they make a difference, they move the needle, they build something, they create things. And to lead those kinds of people, there's a new type of mindset that is necessary. Sort of like how an engineering leader would attract the best talent and retain them. A good sales ops leader, you have to be really good at leading people. And I can't stress how important that's become, because like I said, automatable tasks will get automated, and then you need creative people, and they are hard to manage. And this function, in my mind, is becoming more and more about hiring the best and then retaining them, which is about people.
Is bring some of your best actual sales leadership talent from the field into sales operations.
Yeah.
It makes everyone pause and say, wow, I'm bringing him or her into this function, and that's really important, or they wouldn't do that. And it just makes everyone say, wow, this is, again, not an operational role. They are not a servant. In fact, they're as much the customer of the field organization as vice versa. So I think it's really important you think about this strategically on who you put in these roles. And then when they're in that role, as I said earlier, you really need to go and spread your wings and build cross-functional relationships. Kind of gets back to the things he was talking about, being the EQ side of things. It is critically important that as a sales ops leader, you understand it is your responsibility. Half of your time is to build the bridges and relationships with all of those different functions. From the factory where the product's being created or developed, to the go-to-market sales teams, everything in between in that conduit of how you take it to market, how you price and package it, how you get it to the channel, how you build compensation plans. It all goes through this function. So a lot of it is the EQ side of things and building those bridges and relationships, but also it's really important, obviously, to have the technical skill sets to be able to operate and drive the business as well. And that's why I said if you can bring a tremendous sales leader into this role as a rotational assignment that everyone already respects, it takes everything up to a new level.
I mean, think about the personalities of a finance, a CFO, a personality of a product manager, very engineering-centric, software-centric, an operations person, wants everything done in a specific method, no deviation, and a superstar salesperson who's like all about me. I'm generalizing to a certain extent, but think about those 4 different characters. This is probably one of the only function in any company that they have to work with all of them, deal with them, put up with them, make them like you, make them do what the company wants them to do, and make them productive. And that requires a whole lot of EQ. And it's a beautiful thing when you find people who can manage all of those cast of characters and get stuff done on a daily basis.
So David, you work for, you've seen big companies. Mm-hmm. Jim, you work for a lot of early stage companies. Carl, you've seen it all from small to large. You you see probably the vast majority is probably in your sort of segment. What advice do you have for sales ops leaders that are in different size organizations? Is it different, or is it more or less the same?
I can start. I mean, I generally speaking think that at an early stage company, you're kind of a jack of all trades and you're doing a little bit of everything. And then as the companies go bigger, you build operational functions. So a great example of that would be training, enablement, and onboarding. That's a function. Deal desk, that's a function. Competitive analysis function. The bigger the company, the more you build out the different components underneath sales operations.
Yeah, I think as you go early stage, it's really about product market fit. You're just trying to get deals over the goal line. I'm trying to get reps in. As you move to the next phase, 10 to 25 million, it's really about building that foundation. And then you start leveraging scale. And scale's a whole different set of dynamics than you have when you're building foundation. But as you think through your career trajectory, depending on where you want to go, and the beauty of the role we're talking about is because it's so cross-functional, you can go into a lot of different areas. You can go into sales leadership, CRO, you can go into marketing, you can go into product, you can go into finance. And so, think about what skill sets you want to develop, because you can go and start focusing more on human capital. As the product evolves, your market evolves, your segmentation evolves, you need a different type of skill set. In the CSM org, in the sales org, and you can go very deep in that, thinking through competencies, behavioral-based interviewing skills, learning and development. Then there's the whole sales enablement side of it. How do you actually, once you hire this army, how do you make them the best army when you put them on the field? And then you can go, with the emergence of data and analytics, and to your point, it's not just about managing the Salesforce system and getting comp plans and territories out. It's really about analyzing the whole funnel, reshaping the funnel. As marketing is transforming and sales are transforming, this operations role is the one that's really in the middle, helping to shape both of those, reshape the entire funnel, shape the sales cycle, and shape the engagement model with not only your prospects and customers, but with all of the individuals inside the organization as well. And so I think it depends on what size and where you want to go in your career. And then scale brings a whole nother aspect to that. We saw a little bit of that, but I think you're probably the king of growing and seeing that scale and how you constantly have to be 4, 5, 6 quarters ahead of it, or it sort of hits you right on the side of the head.
I'm not sure I'm the king. I'm the servant. I served everyone else. That was my responsibility. The one thing I would just caution everyone is you guys all raise your hands, right, from the small companies to the larger companies, and even what you're doing today. at Nutanix, the one flaw that you see, or the one error that many people make as you're scaling, is you put too much complexity into the system.
Yeah.
You add all of these different functions, you add all of these different approval processes, you add all these different tools, you add legal, you have finance, right? Then you start hiring sales leaders and sales management, you have multiple tiers of approvals you have to go through. All of that, I caution you to make sure you keep it simple. Part of sales operations is to make sure that the velocity of the sale is frictionless as much as possible, because as things scale, you put all of these different things and policies in place, and that just adds friction. Anytime you add friction, by nature, the definition is it slows things down. And the fastest way to scale, and we talked about this last year, and we wrote a white paper thanks to the help of Clari, the fast way to scale is to simplify. Because if you think about anything, whether it's in business or in life, when you run into trouble, personally or professionally, what does everyone tell you to do? Go back to what?
Basics.
Why? Because it's simple. So I just caution everyone as you scale, think about how do you simplify things for the selling organization, and it's your responsibility to do that because you touch everyone. Simplify to scale. Don't complexify things through policies and regulatory things you have to put in place. It's the biggest danger you have, because you'll see your sales teams start to, have attrition because they say it's just too hard to get deals done. Anyone ever heard of that? Right? Everyone, and it's your responsibility not to let that happen.
Listen, thank you, Carl, for reminding that, because this is it's such an important thing that it's easy to forget. As the company, as we made a transition from being a private company to a public company, there are times where the lawyers will come in and say, auditors will come in and say, you can't do it. You got to have the SOX. Are you going to be on Wall Street Journal because you guys messed up? And 8 years ago, we were like 6 people in a Starbucks. And now that band that we talked about, we are the 2,000 to 3,000 people. And to me, startup is a mindset. It's a state of mind. Startup to me means never letting a single PO go outside. That if you can get it, make it happen. Startup to me is like not letting that candidate slip away. Startup to me is doing whatever it takes to make that customer come back if they're down. Right? All of those kind of things. So sales operations is right in between all of those things. I'll give you an example. Like 2 days ago, I was having my leadership meeting, and I talked about the importance of, for example, an OEM relationship that we have, and how important and strategic it is for us to continue building multiple channels and go to market. And yesterday, there is a comp issue that's been sort of plaguing us. And I didn't say anything. Yesterday, I was sitting in the room, and the field has been escalating about this. And as Carl just pointed out, there were lots of reasons not to go solve it. Lots of good reasons not to solve it. Or solve it in a 2 to 3 months time frame. I was sitting in the room yesterday, I saw Ricky, our sales ops leader, put his backpack and walk across where the CFO sits. And then 15 minutes later, there was an email saying that it is solved. I don't think it is in his job rec to go do that. But he said that there is one of my best salesperson, that one that I admired the most, when he raised it up, he knew that's a real problem. And the reason why he's able to do that is because he knows most of the sellers. Listen, salespeople, we are really good at manipulating things to our W2. There is no question about it. There's always, everything is high priority, everything needs to be solved yesterday. So it's very hard for a salesperson to figure out which one is real, which one is not. But the fact that he knew that, and it is now reached a point it has to be solved, and I can't wait 2 months and go solved. To me, that's what that going extra. That's what a sales ops leader of the future should be able to do.
Well, we're going to flip to the audience. We have a mic that's going around. Questions? All right, we'll start in the front.
Michelle Renault, Semantic. I'm going to confess one of my worst traits. Every single boss I've had for the past 20 years have said to me, Michelle, you are so good at what you do, but you try to fight all the battles, and you just can't. And meaning I see a battle and I try to fight it, and they've all said, you need to focus on how to win the war. So my question is, when you feel like when you've got 20 things on your priority list, and you're trying to say, which of these should I go fight first? What's your problem-solving process that you use to try and figure out which ones to focus on?
look, I think you have to go back to first principles, right? And to me, the first principles when you start to scale is what's going to drive sales, frictionless sales. Second principle is having a customer viewpoint. I think that's what gets missed a lot of when you talk to sales leaders in particular is what's going to make it easier for the customer that you're trying to serve. And then the third bit of advice I'd give you is just make sure you understand your stakeholders. You know, I've always experienced this kind of a diametrically opposed thing that people that have less impact on the organization as they scale sometimes have the biggest opinions. And that's a trap you should try to avoid. So make sure you understand who the request is coming from and what type of an impact it's going to have on your sales organization and your customer base.
Kosta Mirkovic from LinkedIn. Thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. This is a question mostly to Carl. You mentioned an example of bringing sales leaders in sales ops leadership roles. Can you maybe share a few examples of where that happened, how it worked, and like what would you do again and what would you change?
Yeah. So, and when I say sales ops role, it's across multiple functions in sales ops. So, one of the areas I think is a great area to bring someone in from the sales is into sales enablement and channel enablement. Right? Your best people in the field know how to sell. They know how to engage with their partners. They know how to drive deals to closure. They have a sales methodology and process. So why not bring them in and let them be the teacher to teach the rest of their peer group? Because people respond to peer groups better than they do to management. It is what it is. So that's an important function that you have to do. The other is around sales desk or sales, having a sales desk, right, where you're, putting all the deals together through the sales/deal desk, bringing people to be part of that because they know what the friction is to slow things down, like everyone on the panel has talked about. Putting someone in there that says, hey, we can't slow this down in this process. Let's put someone in there who's respected by their peers to help drive that. And then the other thing is, I have seen a tremendous amount of success from someone who used to run inside sales or BDRs and moving them into the sales operations roles. Because they are, right, when you're an outside sales force and you're driving into the enterprise and leveraging inside sales, the man or woman who runs that organization is really critical to the outside team's success, and putting them into that sales ops leadership role is a very powerful move you can make. And then lastly, I would say internationally, it wasn't uncommon, right? Because they're so far outside of the corporate headquarters, which is typically here in the Silicon Valley, taking some of your best sales leaders that are running regions or countries and moving them into sales operations roles internationally can be extremely powerful. And it is recognized on a global basis then, because a lot of times we focus only, as you guys start to scale, you focus only what's happening at corporate. When what happens, sales functions and sales operations get distributed internationally, you have to have it in the regions. Putting some of your greatest sales leaders in those roles is critically important, and it shows the importance of sales operations outside of corporate too. So they're just different things that I've seen done within the organization that I think can be very powerful.
Let me just add something to the prioritization question that you asked, because that's something that I struggle with. It's a learning process for me, and obviously when you're a small company that is easy, now it's larger, it's harder. Earlier, I used to fight every single battle. There's no question about it, because every battle was worth fighting. What I've done now is like one of three things happen when battle starts. One, it creates a lot of noise, and it dies down without any reason. So there's a bunch of emails going back and forth, Slack, all that kind of stuff. And if it is not important, usually it dies down. So I usually don't jump in. Second, if you don't jump in, what happens is someone who you don't expect to solve will jump into that and solve it, which is, again, a good thing to see. You know, someone else is stepping up, and you can see who has the capability to step into a battle and solve that you didn't really think before. A third thing could be that it is actually going to go in a counterproductive way, and you have to jump in to solve it. And so I try to usually now hang back to see if it goes to bucket one, then fine, good riddance, go die. Bucket two, fantastic, now there's a new person who can solve. And number three, if it really cuts to the bone, then I try to jump in. It requires a lot of patience outside, which is something that I'm not really that good at. You got to hold back as long as you can.
Brian O'Malley from Aruba. So a question about organizational design and structure. So you all kind of alluded to sales ops being a strategic partner, not supporting sales. So I think back to when I started with the company, we were in an organization under the CFO. We didn't have a chief operating officer. So there was a reorg and a new sales leader came in, and then we were under sales. And I think to Carl's point, when you think of yourself supporting sales, that's what you are, right? When you report into sales, that's kind of the natural expectation from the sales leader. So if you think about sales ops, where ideally do you think it should sit in an organization to retain that strategic partnership element?
I don't get caught up in it. Because if we all just sit up here and say you're the central nervous system of the company and you're engaging with all of these different functions and you have to build these relationships and bridges, it doesn't matter at the end of the day where you sit. If you're a true team player and your personal objective is to make sure the company is successful first. So I don't get overly caught up in it. I think it's a mindset, just like matrix organizations. I think all that, part of my French, is bullshit. Right? It's about how you deal with people, how you engage with them, and how you lead them at the end of the day. With that being said, my preference, if someone said put a stake in the ground, right, it should be in the sales side. And then you should have a peer counterpart that sits in finance that runs FP&A and planning for field operations and have a field CFO. And they should be one and the same as far as the relationship goes. But I wouldn't over-rotate on it because I think we'd be misleading you if we say you're important, you sit in the epicenter of everything and you're not working in that manner. But I think we'd probably be biased towards sales.
To me, I think the more important question is, are you involved in the strategic discussions in the company, right? So regardless of who you're reporting to, are you participating in the growth offsites, in the executive offsites? Are you participating in those executive level discussions?
Listen, I had an amazing 2 or 3 sales ops leaders, and some of them are actually in this audience at VMware. And when I'd be traveling the world, I had so much confidence in my sales ops leaders. They would go to the board meetings and present on my behalf. Right? When you get to that level of relationship, that level of confidence, and that level of inspiration coming out of sales operations, then you have the Holy Grail and it's working. So that's what we try to achieve.
We're going to squeeze one more question, and then from down
there.
Hey
guys, thank you for amazing insight today. I'm Saad from Medallia. My question is, does the sales ops leader role change with the size of the company? Do you see the same person be successful at a small company versus at a bigger company? And do you see, in your career, have you seen people repeat what they've done with a mid-stage company and go back to the same size and grow it again, same size, and then repeat again? Or have you seen people be more successful, small to large, and then stay with a large company?
Look, I don't have the kind of experience that Carl has to broad brush it. But the growth of Nutanix has been so fast, it's sort of, to me, it's like a snapshot of a startup to a medium size to a public company. So within that context, what I could say is that it all comes down to the person. I mean, human beings, we have almost an infinite capacity to grow, learn, and evolve. But the question is, are we putting that, the professional growth, career growth, is that the number one thing that is wired for your brain? Are you working to live or living to work? All of those things play into it. But growth has to happen. If you, as a sales ops leader, if you take your day and divide that into, let's say, 10 hours, and then you take let's say, you do this as an exercise. You go write what you've done for this 1 week, every 10 hours, hour by hour. Then a year from now, you go back and do the same thing and compare. And if almost same activities are happening, then you probably are not growing and learning the way the company has to grow and learn, expecting you to do that. I want the kind of people, it is not just sales ops, any function. I want people who are like chomping at the bit to say, you know what, I've done it, I've learned it, we automated it, what's the next thing I can do? Because, I watched this movie, Hidden Figures. For the first half of the movie, I was completely confused because they keep calling computers and it's a bunch of people. In my mind, computers is a device. And there is that one scene where, computers is a bunch of, in that movie, there's an African-American group of ladies who sit in a room and they will give them a bunch of computational job in the morning and evening they will take it.
And then somewhere in the half of the movie, they will get this mainframe computer from IBM that is designed. And this one lady comes into the room and says, that computer can do 25,000 calculations per minute. Our jobs are doomed. And then the story is that she goes into public library and picks up a Fortran book and comes back to the room and says, listen, we have two choices. We're going to be automated our way out of it. Computers are going to do faster jobs than we can never catch up. Or we can learn Fortran and master that computer. That leapfrogging mindset, 50 years after, still exists. You can be afraid of automation, or you can master it and then go to the next level. So that constant evolution to me is the spirit, and this is why I love being here in Silicon Valley, because every job you have an opportunity to tame that beast and move to the next step.
Well, I apologize. I know you probably have hundreds of questions, but we have to end our panel. First round of applause for the panelists here.